said you can't go further into the bardo and return. And so I think that we stand at the brink of an enormous frontier. Call it incorporeality, call it non-material existence, or, bite the bullet. Call it death. But this is the frontier that we stand on the edge of. This is what history has been about. History has been some kind of suicide plot for 15,000 years. Not a moment passed that the plot would not advance closer and closer and closer and closer to completion. And now in the 20th century, we see that this thing, this transcendental object at the end of time, this attractor that chose us out of the animal kingdom and sculpted the neocortex, opposed the thumb, stood us on our hind legs, gave us binocular vision. This thing is calling us toward itself across eons of cosmic time. We are asked to mirror it, and as we mirror it, we become more of its essence. And as we become more of its essence, we leave behind the animal organization that we were cast in the beginning. And what this is about, who knows? Is this a drama of cosmic redemption? Is it the transcendental other at the end of time? Is it a Gnostic demon? Is it Ildabla? What is it? We do not know. But I really believe we are in the era when we will come to know. And what the psychedelics are periscopes in the temporal dimension. If you want to see a little bit into the future, elevate your psychedelic periscope outside of the three-dimensional continuum and peer around. For thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, we have been pulled toward this omega point. The Earth is like an egg. It has come to its moment of fructification. The dawn that has been anticipated since we were herding our cattle across the plains of Africa is now upon us. The east is streaked with the blush of rosy dawn. It is coming upon us, and I think that it will redeem history. That history is not a nightmare. It is a passage. It is an initiation. Think of the fetus in the womb at the moment of transition. Surely it must despair. The walls are closing in. It's being crushed and strangled. Gone are the endless amniotic oceans of a few months before, the weightlessness, the effortless delivery of food through the umbilical cord. Suddenly, it's just boundaries and agony and crushing pressure. That's where we are. And we are going to have to shed history like a snake sheds its skin if we want to slip off into hyperspace, where I think all of magical humanity is awaiting us and cheering us on, lending their weight. They're all out there, Proclus and Plotinus and Plato and Hypatia and Henry Cornelius Agrippa and John Dee and Robert Flood and Eliphas Levi. They're all out there pulling for us. And every shaman and shamaness, every magician, practitioner, as far back in time as you go, was part of the plan, the conjuration, the great work, the distillation of the quintessence. History is a magical invocation. And at the end of that invocation, if it is correctly done, all boundaries will dissolve into the stone, the lapis, a transdimensional vehicle that can move through space and time, that is the collectivity of all human souls, free at last in what William Blake called the divine you don't have to wait for the general dispensation. You can join up anytime by hyperspatializing your metaphors and your point of view through psychedelic symbiosis with the plants that are pouring this hyperdimensional Gaian vision into the minds of anyone who will detoxify themselves from history and linear thinking, and but open themselves to the presence of the transformative mystery that is going to leave this planet unrecognizable to us within our lifetimes. So that's the basic spiel. And I think it raises a lot of questions, and yours is first. Please, wait, is there a microphone, or was that thoughtfully anticipated?
Just repeat it.
I'll repeat it.
Okay, are there any northern hemisphere Western herbs that would have this that we would have access to?
The answer is yes, yes.
Repeat the question.
The question is, are there herbs in the temperate zone that contain DMT? And yes, there are certain grasses, Phalaris arundinacea, Phalaris tuberosa. These can be ordered from plant dealers or gotten, ironically enough, from agricultural experiment stations, because these are pasture-age grasses. A lot of people are doing wonderful work right now learning how to make DMT preparations out of native plants. The mature Phalaris grass, it's very diffuse, the DMT. So what people are doing is they're getting the seeds and they're sprouting them in a sprouter. And then they're taking the sprouted seeds and air drying them. Well, you can imagine how powdery sprouts become if you air dry them. Well, then you can powder up a handful of these sprouts and twist that into a bomber and come very, very close to the flash point. The other thing, since I'm talking to recipe-oriented magicians, the other thing you need to understand if you want to work in this area is that the DMT can ordinarily not be taken orally because there is an enzyme system in your intestines called the monoamine oxidase system, and it will destroy the DMT. But the good news is there are certain compounds called monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Didn't you know it? If you take a monoamine oxidase inhibitor and then you take DMT, the DMT will survive the gut and pass into the bloodstream and pass the blood-brain barrier. So here is a very important piece of practical information I'm about to give you. If you want to inhibit your monoamine oxidase in order to make DMT trips longer or mushroom trips longer and more intense, or to activate DMT if you only have a little bit of it, then what you should get are the seeds of Pergamum harmala. P-E-R-G-A-M-U-M, Pergamum harmala, H-A-R-M-A-L-A. You can either order it under that name from seed dealers, or go to an Iranian market and buy what is called Hurmal, H-U-R-M-A-L. This is simply Pergamum harmala seeds. They use it as an incense to fumigate rooms. But 2 grams, don't take more. 2 grams of this, macerated in a mortar and pestle with spring water taken from a spring at the new moon near a crossroads, will inhibit your MAO. It will inhibit your MAO. Consequently, then when you smoke the bomber of Phalaris dust, it will grab on. Or you can even smoke mushrooms then, and they will grab on. So knowing how to inhibit MAO is one of the key techniques in this kind of herbal shamanic magic. Other plants that contain DMT, and here's one you all should be aware of because it's probably right around here, is Desmanthus illinoisensis, Illinois bundleweed. It's a rank weed. I've not seen it except in the dried form, but people have grown hundreds of pounds of this stuff in a few months, and the root bark has the highest concentration of DMT ever measured in any plant. It's higher than the ayahuasca admixtures used in the Amazon. Pardon?
In the root, you said?
In the root bark. The root bark, which you dry the root and then scrape the bark off, and you'll get this reddish root bark. The red is actually the DMT. Varroa trees in the Amazon shed DMT in their sap, and it's always a blood red sap. And to show you how strong it is, the Indians in the Amazon, some of the tribes, they roll their arrow points directly into that sap, and it's a paralytic poison in the bloodstream of monkeys and small animals. So there is a great deal of work is being done right now, and you should, if you're of an experimental and herbal and alchemical and magical bent, people are creating what they call ayahuasca analogs. This is where you use local plants to create a brew which is chemically equivalent to an Amazonian hallucinogen. And, of course, you have the satisfaction that it's yours. It's your magical recipe. No one on earth is doing quite what you've got. And it's a lot of interesting work is being done, and you'll hear more about this. In fact, Jonathan Ott just wrote a book called Ayahuasca Analogs, in which the state of the art is spelled out, and it would be worth your while to check that out if you're an experimentalist. Yeah. The question is there a simple reagent test for the presence of DMT? The answer is sort of. You can do a paper chromatographic test, and all you need is a little UV light and some chromatography paper and some solvent dishes. I mean, it's at the level of a 7th grade science project. Yes, I don't know how much I should say on this subject. I'm probably about to say too much. But at one gathering I go to, one of the people who's a very regular part of that particular posse is a wheat breeder. So when he heard about the phalaris, he was a geneticist and a wheat breeder, and he has been working very quietly on his own to produce super strains of phalaris. And I think we will soon see super strains, because the underground community is incredibly creative in this area. The compound I talked about yesterday, Salvia divinorum, that's all underground work. Brett Blosser, the anthropologist who discovered it, is a complete freak. The chemist who extracted it, who would prefer I don't put out his name, is a complete freak. And the people who then did the confirmation studies, my brother and his band of performing pharmacologists, all three. So we do not take ourselves seriously enough. I mean, we have our scientists, we have our philosophers, we have our thinkers, our legal experts. We are a complete community. And it's no longer, in my mind, even necessary to publish in straight journals and to seek a pat on the head from, the American pharmacology community. They don't understand what these things are for anyway. Yes.
About yesterday, you mentioned something of the jungle in the Batesville, California, and I don't have the first part of that. Could you give us the name of the...
Yes, I'll repeat this.
Okay.
And strengthen once again my case to the guy who owns the company that he should pay me for God's sake. If you want a catalog of extremely rare and useful psychoactive and magical plants, probably the most complete in the world, the company is called Of the Jungle. P.O. Box 1801, Sebastopol, Sebastopol, California, 95472. Write and ask for a catalog, and tell them George Bush sent you. No, I'm teasing. Don't tell them that. They won't send you the catalog. 1801 is the box number. Yeah.
Did you see Carlos Castaneda's new book, The Art of Reading?
I haven't. I have so much reading to do that I tend to restrict my reading to nonfiction.
I can write in there something of use, at least metaphorically, for these machine-like cells. He talks about attaining a state of lucid dreaming, then he talks about inorganic beings entering into that lucid dreaming. He calls them scouts. And he sees two kinds, different kinds of energy. One he calls a crackling energy, and another kind of sizzling energy that the scouts appear with in the dream. And they're inorganic, beings actually outside come in. I have found very similar descriptions in the fairy state and Celtic countries by W.Y. Evans Wentz. I think it's highly improbable that the two would be so close that something wasn't there, regardless of the apparent fictional nature of much of this narrative.
Well, Lenny, I didn't mean to diss Castaneda as a metaphor maker. No, I think the Teachings of Don Juan is a tremendous book. I'm very suspicious of some of his later stuff. It's interesting what you said, because you know the famous crow transformation in the Teachings of Don Juan has been traced, and I'm sure many of you know this book, has been traced to George MacDonald's book, Through the Gates of the Silver Key. And George MacDonald was a friend of Evans Vance. So I think what we're getting here is a mining of late 19th century English folklore by Castaneda. Nevertheless, the presence of these small entities has been a part of folklore for a long, long time. Elementals, types. What puzzles me, I guess, is I've spent a lot of time in this magical literature and art historical area, and the descriptions don't quite match. I can't quite convince myself that the sprites, the afrits, the nixies, the jinns, these creatures of the woodland fae are the same thing. Or I don't know whether I am contaminated by an early love of science fiction. Well, again, close but no banana. There's all these popular aliens that are running around, you know, the Whitley Streboids and all these things, are much more mundane than what I encountered. I mean, what I encountered was terrifyingly not human, terrifyingly alien, and I just do not quite get. And Madame Blavatsky was into it, and they're always saying, you know, I don't know, they're very sort of cut and dried about it. And when I encounter an extraterrestrial alien or a creature from another dimension, the main thing that's happening for me is the implications are blowing my mind. They seem totally immune to the implications. Yeah. Scream.
with non-corporeal aliens who exist in a non
Well, a sufficient amount of DMT is smoked west of the Pacific Coast Highway that it wouldn't surprise me if the writers of Star Trek, were onto this. Yes, what is not much talked about, the part of the experience which is anomalous, and maybe people who know more about magical literature than I do can correct me, but what the elves are really interested in is this stuff which I call visible language. That's the whole point of the encounter, is to exhibit it and to get you to do it. Well, now, first of all, think for a minute about ordinary language. It's really weird. It's the weirdest thing we do. If you were looking for the thumbprint of God on creation, human language would be a good candidate. Because, look, we're supposed to be some kind of animal who just went a little further than the next guy. But to get out of that Shakespeare and Milton is a pretty amazing accomplishment, hardly to speak of the mathematical languages that we generate. So something happened. Some people think only 35,000 years ago. Imagine if that's true. I don't care. Some people say 150,000 years ago. But to speak, to take small mouth noises, and to turn them into signifiers for symbols and relationships, in spite of some people's enthusiasm for cetaceans and dolphins, I just am not overwhelmed by the evidence. To me, it is a miracle to be able to speak poetry. It is a miracle. When Coleridge wrote, "And south and south and southward we fled, and it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high went floating by as green as emerald." That's language, and it's magic. And we have a fascination, then we also paint, then we sculpt, then we write, then we create electronic databases, then film, television. Clearly, what we want to do is we want to communicate visually. And these things are saying there's a way to do it. Do it! And I don't understand. Do we all have to be loaded on DMT all the time? Can you learn to do this? The gentleman who asked about dreams, here's a piece of information that is critical in this jigsaw puzzle. If you have smoked DMT at any time in the past, it is possible to have a dream in which people are running around and you're checked into the Mars Hotel and the luggage is lost and this and that, and in the middle of all that, someone drags out a little glass pipe and hands it to you. It will happen. It will happen in the dream. Not a memory, not a simulacrum. It will really happen. Well, now, to me, that's an amazing piece of data, because what it's saying is you can do it on the natch. You may have to be dead asleep, but still, on the natch, this can be done. And the lucid dreamers, the biofeedback people, the people who claim these wonderful things that you can do with sleep and dream and programming, I challenge them. Teach people to have DMT dreams in their sleep. And then let's figure out how to drag that puppy into the light so that we can do it at will on the natch. Just one second. One thing that I have come to believe is that we remember no more than 5% of our dreams, and it's the most mundane 5%. I think, and there's scientific evidence to support this. Remember I said DMT is in the human brain? Well, it concentrates in the human cerebrospinal fluid on a 24-hour cycle, and it reaches its peak of concentration between 3 and 4 a.m. in most people. That's when the deep REM sleep is happening. When you give somebody DMT, they lay back, they close their eyes, and the way you, the guide, the sitter, I don't like the word guide, you, the sitter, the way you can tell that they're getting off is their eyes dart wildly behind their closed eyelids. It means they're in REM. They're in REM sleep. They've been immediately shoved into deep dreaming. So I believe that what DMT is doing in normal human metabolism is it mediates the descent, the spiral descent into dream, and that every single night we are reunited with the boundaryless oceanic mystery of being that we are so frantic about in waking life and so distant from. And that if we could in fact just engineer a drug that would allow us to remain fully conscious as we drift deeper into dream, we would need no other drug or substance. That's where we want to go. And I think that's where history is headed. What the Archaic Revival is about is a revivification of the Aboriginal dream time. We are going to live in the imagination. We are preparing to decamp from three-dimensional space. I mean, yes, the Earth is the cradle of the human race, but you don't stay in the cradle forever, you know. And it's something like going into dream. It's something like taking the hyper-technical virtual reality internet head of the snake and inserting the shamanic, late Paleolithic, ecstatic, orgiastic tail of the snake, and then you have the Ouroboros completion. Then you have the quintessence, and the work is complete, and history ends, and we live then in the light of the stone made manifest. Yeah.
A question about the highway.
Wait a minute. This person. Then you. Sort of. Yeah. I understand what you're saying, but is there a question? Well, it definitely has something, this mystery that we're talking about, it definitely has something to do with sound and the magical role of sound. Ayahuasca is a sort of different way of sectioning the DMT experience, because ayahuasca is orally active, unfolds over hours, is not as dramatic as DMT, but the people who use ayahuasca as a ritual on a weekly basis, what their practice consists of is they take this stuff and then they sing. They sing like crazy, and then when they stop singing and people light a cigarette and take a leak and so forth, and you're listening to these conversations, you hear people say stuff about the shaman like, I like the part with the olive drab and the silver, But when it became magenta and moved toward orange, I thought he was over the top. What kind of a criticism of a song is that? And the answer is, sound has become a visually beheld medium.
It's like a new way of creating visual art that interactive between the people who are on the DMT.
Yes. So the reason I'm interested in something as techno-nerdy as virtual reality is because you could program a virtual reality so that when you went an iridescent blue line would be keyed to that to descend into the space. And I'm very interested in environmental and electronic simulations of psychedelic states. But we're not going to do better than the psychedelics. If we can do as well, it will be a miracle. I mean, you see more beauty in a first wave of psilocybin than the human race has produced in the past 5,000 years. And who are you? No, I had promised this guy venue, and I felt his flash of loathing.
It seems to me that 2012, the mega point that you talked about, might be sort of the twisted shield point, like the Mobius strip of time. We're going to break through and continue on over again. The event sequence will then start over again for 73 billion years.
I hadn't considered that, but that sounds possible. I mean, we're definitely coming to some enormous cusp, and whether you think it's the cusp of cusps or just a big cusp, it's hard to say. Somebody faxed me. I got a fax right before I came here. I don't know who sent it to me. It was just an anonymous fax, but in huge letters it said, when you strip away the hype, it's just another concrescence. Yes.
I'm curious to know what the universality of your experience that you described is. I mean, certainly it's not to other people who have taken DMT. Without having told them your experience, are they reporting very, very close to the same thing?
It's interesting, and that's a good question. The answer is yes and no. Obviously, there's hardly anything more personal than a psychedelic experience. It is a kind of summation of who you are, and it's viewed through the filters of your personality. Nevertheless, when you put a whole bunch of DMT trips together, certain things seem to emerge. My notion, coming at it from a sort of Jungian attitude, is if we had to say what is the archetype of DMT, the archetype is the circus. It's the circus. And let me say why. First of all, a circus is a place of wild, exotic activity. And clowns are, you don't have a circus without clowns. And clowns are wonderful for children. A circus is a wonderful place for a child. DMT, there is something very, very weirdly childlike about it in a very unchildish way. Some of you may know the 52nd fragment of Heraclitus, where he says, the aeon is a child at play with colored balls. The aeon is the child that you encounter in the elf dome. But the circus has other connotations than simply the three rings and the clowns. Eros is present, entwined with Thanatos, in the form of the nearly naked lady in the tiny spangled costume who is working without nets, hanging by her teeth up near the top of the big tent. And personally, my earliest experience of Eros was that lady in the tiny spangled costume. I was so small, I was wrapped up in something and being held, and I was horny as hell. So there's that. And then there is also, radiating off from the central ring, the freak show. The goat-faced boy, the lady in the bottle, and, the three-toed alligator kid, and all of that. That's there. The wiggy, weird, kinky, strange, alien stuff. And then, if you think about the archetype, not so much of the circus, but of the carnival represents a breakthrough from another dimension. Because you live in some jerkwater town in some, I almost said Iowa, but somewhere, and it's like normal. And then the carnival comes to town, and children are told, you can't stay out and play. The carny people are in town. And what does it mean? Well, they may fuck differently than we do. They may steal things. They're not like us. They've had more than one marriage, some of them. And then the carnival people are there, and the hoochie-coochie dancers and the whole thing, and then they fold it up, and they go away, just like a DMT trip. And every little boy and girl in the world worth their salt wants to join the circus, of course, and go away with the tattooed lady and the tigers and all that. So it is the archetype of the circus. So then I've seen many, many people take DMT, and some get what I get, which is it's sort of gone beyond the circus. It's the circus that the circus as presented on the Neville Ganoubi Prime or something like that. But one woman who was an anthropologist who I think got a sub-threshold dose, she had a very interesting trip because it was a light trip, but with no prompting from me. She said, I was at a carnival midway, but it was after hours, and there was nobody there, and there were just those ice cream, those square papers for holding ice cream were just blowing in the wind and getting caught in chain-link fences. It was like a sub-threshold dose. Well, then if she'd done more, she would have arrived there 8 hours earlier when the thing was happening, and if she'd done yet another toke, it would have moved off into the zone of the truly weird. That's why I love the film of Federico Fellini, because here was a circus, man, for sure. Yeah.
Is there a way orally or visually to get the effect? I'm not allowed to use the
A way to get the DMT? Well, you could conceivably inhibit your MAO. I don't want to tell you to do it nasally because it might be a really stinging experience. Well, then you could do it. I'm working on something. I'll describe it to you. I'm having a glass blower make a thing which has a chamber with a pipe stem coming off it. But it has another stem 180 degrees around the chamber coming off it that breaks into two prongs. And what you do is you heat the DMT, you insert the two prongs up your nose, and you have a friend blow on the other outlet, and it will force the entire contents of the vessel, the entire load of white smoke. But, don't try this at home. Pardon me? I'd go light the first time. There are old pharmacologists and bold pharmacologists, but there are no old, bold pharmacologists. Yeah.
Is the MAO inhibitor the same as the antidepressants?
There are antidepressants that are MAO inhibitors, that's right, but I wouldn't use them for this purpose because what you want is what's called a reversible MAO inhibitor. And harmine, or harmaline, which is in the Syrian rue, is a reversible MAO inhibitor, reversible in 4 to 6 hours. Some of these antidepressants inhibit every molecule of MAO in your body for up to 3 weeks. And that's why when they give you those antidepressants, they tell you the long list of don'ts, no chocolate, no red wine, no soft cheese, no lentils, no this. That's a list of alkaloid-containing foods. And if you are on those monoamine oxidase inhibiting antidepressants and you eat a bunch of camembert with your yuppie friends, you'll probably have to be roped down for a while before you straighten out. Yeah.
How does DMT experience compare to those you've had on what substances which might be familiar to some of us, like psychedelic mushrooms and LSD?
He said, how does DMT compare to more familiar psychedelics like mushrooms and LSD? Let me say this about mushrooms. I mean, mushrooms are my thing. I mean, they enlightened me, they straightened me out, they love me. But the way to do mushrooms is the very first move, if you're interested in mushrooms, is, for God's sake, buy a scale. Buy a scale. I mean, you wouldn't think that this would be considered such an exotic suggestion to people who are going to put their bodies and minds on the line, because people don't take enough. People do not take enough mushrooms. They take pissant amounts and then they claim that they're initiates. You must take a measured 5 dry grams on an empty stomach. Measured. And when you see what that is, you'll realize that, you weren't even camped in the atrium, you were camped in the driveway. And mushrooms, in some ways, I mean, DMT is the most terrifying and astonishing thing in the universe. But it's very hard to know what to do with it. Psilocybin is your friend. It wants to teach. It will take you by the hand and forgive you and lead you and be with you. And it speaks. This is the amazing thing. And you're hearing this from, somebody who graduated from Heidegger and F.H. Bradley. It speaks. No other psychedelic does that, in my experience. Occasionally, a phrase will pop into your head on another substance that is like a gift, an aphorism. But I mean, psilocybin raves. It raves. And it has positions. I mean, you may not like psilocybin as a person, because it is not. The astonishing thing about the psilocybin entity, to my mind, and I get good confirmation of this, is it is not very earthly. I mean, it wants to show you machines the size of Manhattan in orbit around alien stars. It wants to talk about the sweep through of the which happened before the Earth cooled, and it, has seen the empires of the Rull out at the rim and all the rest of it. And it's very puzzling, this cosmic galactarian tone, because then you switch over to ayahuasca, which is literally just a twist of the molecule, just the tiniest tweaking of the molecule, and suddenly it's about childbirth, rivers, the land, the feminine, looking inside your body, curing diseases, feeling, telepathy, communication. It could hardly be more different. And yet chemically these things are like two sides of the same coin. So just to sum this up and put a kind of a classifier on it, I am not very interested in drugs per se. I've done a lot of them, bad ones, good ones, and people do drugs for fun and for stupid reasons but there is this tiny chemical family, the tryptamine hallucinogens, psilocybin and DMT, and then some artificial coagingers, and 5-methoxy is in there too, which I'm not that fond of. But this is the doorway. It's the umbilicus of this world. These are things which are called drugs, because that's the category we have for things which make the world unrecognizable. But these are not drugs. They are magical doorways into staggeringly titanic dimensions of gnosis, power, information, understanding, and dimensions filled with affection for humanity. So people say, well, you think drugs should be legalized. Yeah, but that's a political opinion of Terence McKenna, who's just a guy like you. But this stuff about the tryptamines is a real discovery. And you can think what you like about me and my take on it. In fact, please do. But check it out. Check it out. Because I've checked out lots of stuff, and this is the only thing I'm interested in telling you. Check it out. Yeah.
Well, granted that at the time, Cincinnatian was a myth that didn't manifest. 10 years later, I still grew up in psychedelic abundance. But we had heard all about DMT and this other stuff, STP, but no one ever saw it. How come? I mean, I didn't live, I'm not from...
No, I don't understand that. The answer to that question, it's magical. It is a secret which keeps itself. I mean, here I am. There are 200 people here, whatever, and I do this all the time. And I have not, so far as I can tell, been able to launch an avalanche of DMT. I'm trying.